My mom called me at 3 a.m. Get your brother and hide. Don't trust your stepfather. So, I did. Sophia, he's coming upstairs right now. My mother's voice cut through the phone at 3:22 a.m., raw with terror I'd never heard before. Get Noah and run. Now. Don't trust Frank. He just finished mixing something in the garage. I can smell gas. The line went dead, and through my bedroom window, I watched Frank's shadow moving across our backyard toward the house, carrying what looked like a small metal canister. I threw on jeans and grabbed my emergency backpack, the one I'd kept packed since Dad died 2 years ago, when paranoia about losing more family had consumed me. $300, phone charger, change of clothes. Frank's heavy footsteps echoed on the stairs as I crept toward Noah's room, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Noah was sprawled across his bed in superhero pajamas, 10 years old and completely trusting that adults would keep him safe. I pressed my hand over his mouth before shaking him awake, watching his eyes fly open in terror. Emergency, I whispered against his ear. Mom called. We have to leave right now without making any sound. The smell of propane was seeping through the heating vents now, confirming Mom's warning. Frank was staging a gas leak, probably rigging delayed ignition to make our deaths look accidental. Noah's eyes went wide with understanding beyond his years, and he nodded against my palm. I helped him dress silently, both of us moving like ghosts in the darkness. Frank's voice echoed from downstairs, talking to someone on his phone. The mother's handled. Yeah, she found the papers, but it doesn't matter now. Give me 20 minutes to set the scene and get clear. Make sure the insurance investigator knows about her history of depression and drug use. My blood turned to ice water. Whatever had happened to Mom, Frank was already spinning it as part of his cover story. The basement window was our only escape route that wouldn't take us past Frank. I helped Noah through first, then followed him into the cold night air that reeked of propane. We ran through the woods behind our subdivision, not stopping until we reached Mom's car parked on the street where she must have left it after somehow escaping the house. Her purse was on the passenger seat, keys in the ignition like she'd been planning for exactly this scenario. Inside the purse, beneath her wallet and lipstick, I found insurance policies that made my stomach drop. $2 million on Mom's life, $500,000 each on Noah and me, all taken out by Frank in the past 6 months. The beneficiary was listed as Franklin Walsh, not Frank Brennan, like we'd always known him. Where's Mom? Noah asked as I started the engine with shaking hands. Why did she sound so scared? What's Frank doing with gas? His questions hung in the air while I tried to process the scope of what we'd discovered. Frank wasn't just planning to kill us for insurance money, he was operating under a false identity while doing it. The drive to grandmother's mountain cabin took 45 minutes through winding roads I hadn't traveled since her funeral. But it was remote, hidden, and the only safe place I could think of where Frank wouldn't immediately find us. The spare key was still hidden under the loose porch board, exactly where grandmother had kept it for 30 years. Inside, dust covered everything like a shroud, but the electricity worked, and the old landline had a dial tone. I tried calling Mom's cell phone repeatedly, but each attempt went straight to voicemail. Her phone was either destroyed or she was. The silence felt ominous, confirming that Frank's comment about the mother's handled meant something terrible. I spread the insurance documents across grandmother's kitchen table, studying them by lamplight while Noah explored the small cabin. The policies weren't just large, they contained double indemnity clauses for accidental death. Attached were receipts for propane tanks, electrical timers, and something called delayed ignition devices. Frank had been systematically purchasing everything needed to stage a gas explosion. But there were more documents in Mom's purse, hidden behind family photos like she'd been building a secret case file. Printouts from Frank's computer showed emails between him and someone called Vincent, discussing the Walsh job and timing for the accident. The emails referenced previous successful jobs in Arizona, Colorado, and Oregon. My phone rang at 4:17 a.m., Frank's name appearing on the screen. I stared at it through 4 rings before answering, putting it on speaker so Noah could hear. Frank's voice came through calm and concerned, the perfect impression of a worried stepfather whose family had vanished during a crisis. Sophia, honey, something terrible happened tonight. Your mother had some kind of breakdown and tried to hurt herself. She's in the hospital now, and you girls are missing from the house. I found your bedroom windows open, and I'm terrified something happened to you. His performance was flawless, concerned and loving with just the right amount of panic. What hospital? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. We want to see her. Noah pressed closer to me, both of us listening to Frank's lies with growing understanding of how dangerous he really was. Every word sounded rehearsed, like he'd practiced this conversation before making the call. County General, but visiting hours don't start until morning. The doctors said she was in a highly agitated state, talking about conspiracies and accusing me of trying to hurt the family. They had to sedate her for her own safety. Where are you girls? I'll come get you right now so we can figure this out together. The lie was smooth and believable, designed to make us feel guilty for running and eager to return to his protection. But I could hear something underneath his concerned tone, something calculating and cold that made my skin crawl. This was the voice of a predator who'd spent 2 years building trust before revealing his true nature. We're safe, I said finally. We'll come home when Mom can tell us what happened. Frank's silence stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. When he spoke again, his voice had changed subtly, becoming harder despite maintaining the pretense of paternal concern. Sophia, you're 17, and Noah is 10. You can't take care of him alone. If you don't come home immediately, I'll have to report you as missing and endangered. The police will find you, and this whole situation will become much more complicated for everyone involved. I hung up and immediately called 911, planning to report Frank's threats and explain about the insurance policies. But when the dispatcher answered, she already had information about our case. Frank had called 2 hours ago, reporting that his mentally unstable wife had kidnapped her children during a psychotic episode. Your stepfather is very worried, the dispatcher said. He's explained that your mother has been having psychiatric problems and may have filled your heads with paranoid ideas about him. We need to get you somewhere safe until we can sort out what's really happening. Can you tell me where you are so we can help? Frank had called first, established his version of events, and positioned himself as the concerned parent trying to save his family from a delusional woman. My attempts to explain about insurance policies and staged accidents sounded exactly like the paranoid delusions he'd already warned them about. I hung up on the dispatcher and sat staring at the documents, trying to understand the scope of Frank's planning. The policies had been purchased through different companies to avoid suspicion. The receipts showed systematic acquisition of materials that could create an explosion large enough to destroy our house and eliminate all witnesses. But there were more papers I hadn't noticed before. Medical records from Mom's doctor showing prescriptions for psychiatric medications I'd never seen her take. Frank had been building a paper trail of mental instability, probably drugging her food to cause erratic behavior that would support his claims when we disappeared. Noah found me crying at the kitchen table and climbed into my lap like he used to when he was smaller. Sophia, why would Frank want to hurt us? He taught me to ride my bike. He came to every soccer game. How could someone who seemed so nice be planning to kill us? I didn't have answers that would make sense to a 10-year-old. How do you explain that some monsters are patient enough to spend years building trust before striking? That the man who'd seemed like a loving stepfather had been methodically planning our deaths while pretending to care about our happiness? My phone buzzed with text messages throughout the morning, all from family members Frank had contacted. Aunt Linda wrote that she was praying for Mom's recovery and hoped we'd cooperate with Frank during this difficult time. Uncle Robert said Frank had explained about Mom's breakdown and offered his help with anything we needed. And Frank had spent months cultivating relationships with our extended family, positioning himself as the stable presence holding our household together, while Mom struggled with unnamed emotional problems. He'd created a network of people who would support his version of events when accusations started flying. The landline rang at 10:30 a.m. and I answered cautiously, hoping for Mom's voice but expecting another manipulation from Frank. Instead, an unfamiliar woman identified herself as Detective Maria Santos with the County Sheriff's Department. Her tone was professional, but carried suspicion that made me immediately defensive. Sophia, I need to talk to you about your mother's condition and your current situation. Your stepfather is extremely concerned about your welfare, and we want to make sure you and Noah are safe. Your mother made some serious accusations last night, but she was heavily sedated and may not have been thinking clearly. Detective Santos explained that Mom was in psychiatric hold at County General, unable to communicate coherently after what appeared to be a suicide attempt involving prescription medication. Frank had provided extensive medical history suggesting she'd been struggling with depression and paranoid delusions for months. The insurance policies you mentioned are standard financial planning for blended families, Detective Santos continued. The equipment in your garage is for your stepfather's construction business. Everything has reasonable explanations that don't support the conspiracy theories your mother described during her crisis. I tried to explain about the emails, the false identity, the systematic purchase of explosive materials, but every piece of evidence I mentioned had been anticipated and explained by Frank's narrative about Mom's deteriorating mental health. He'd positioned her warnings as delusions and my support of them as children being influenced by a disturbed parent. I need you to consider Noah's welfare, Detective Santos said. He's been out of school, living in an abandoned cabin, because his teenage sister believes his stepfather wants to kill him. That's not healthy for a child, regardless of what you think you've discovered. The conversation ended with a veiled threat disguised as concern. Either I brought Noah back voluntarily, or Child Protective Services would remove him from my care for his own protection. Frank had maneuvered us into a position where trying to save Noah would result in losing him to the system. I spent the afternoon researching Franklin Walsh online, finding fragments of his real identity scattered across public records. He'd lived in 6 different states over the past 12 years, always working construction, always moving on after 2 or 3 years. But the deeper I dug, the more disturbing patterns emerged. Newspaper archives showed suspicious deaths in Arizona, Colorado, and Oregon that matched Frank's timeline. House fires, gas explosions, carbon monoxide poisonings, all involving construction workers' families who'd recently increased their life insurance coverage. The deaths were always ruled accidental, but the pattern was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. In Phoenix, Robert and Linda Kowalski died in a gas explosion 6 months after Robert married Linda, a widow with substantial existing life insurance. In Denver, Michael and Susan Delacroix died in a house fire 18 months after Michael married Susan and her 2 young children. The children died too, just like Frank was planning for Noah and me. Each case showed the same methodology. Target vulnerable widows with existing life insurance, marry them quickly, increase their coverage, build evidence of mental instability, then eliminate the entire family through staged accidents. Frank wasn't just a killer, he was part of a systematic operation that had been working for over a decade. But the most chilling discovery was in the Oregon case. David and Jennifer Walsh had died in a carbon monoxide poisoning that was ruled accidental, but Jennifer's sister had hired a private investigator who found evidence suggesting murder. The investigator's report mentioned David Walsh working with associates to stage the deaths, part of a larger insurance fraud network. Frank had been using variations of his real name across different identities, probably with false documents provided by his criminal associates. Franklin Walsh, Frank Walsh, David Walsh, Robert Walsh. The same man killing families in different states under slightly different identities, always staying one step ahead of law enforcement. I photographed every document and news article, uploading them to cloud storage accounts Frank couldn't access. If something happened to us, at least there would be evidence of his pattern and methods. But Noah was getting more anxious as the day progressed, asking when we could go home and see Mom. That evening, I found more documents hidden in Mom's purse, stuffed inside a tampon box where Frank would never look. Bank statements showing large cash deposits into accounts I'd never heard of, always shortly after Frank's construction jobs ended. Correspondence with medical professionals about Mom's deteriorating mental health, all initiated by Frank. The medical records showed a systematic campaign to establish Mom's instability. Frank had scheduled appointments with psychiatrists, claiming she was having paranoid episodes and violent outbursts. He'd gotten prescriptions for antipsychotic medications that he claimed she refused to take, building a paper trail of noncompliance that would explain her eventual breakdown. But the most damning evidence was a burner phone hidden in the tampon box, containing text messages between Frank and someone called Vincent, discussing the timing of the Walsh job. The messages referred to Mom as the target, and discussed methods for eliminating witnesses without arousing suspicion. Target showing suspicious behavior. May have found something, Frank had texted 3 days ago. Accelerate timeline. Ready to implement solution within 48 hours. Vincent's response was chilling. Understood. Cleanup crew on standby. Make it look like murder-suicide. Mother kills children, then herself. Depression over husband's death finally overwhelmed her. The plan was more elaborate than I'd realized. Frank wasn't just going to kill us and collect insurance money. He was going to frame Mom for our murders before staging her suicide. The perfect crime that would generate sympathy for the grieving stepfather while eliminating all witnesses to his operation. I tried calling the FBI tip line, explaining about the pattern of deaths across multiple states and the insurance fraud network. Special Agent Catherine Reeves took my call with initial skepticism that gradually shifted to intense interest as I described Frank's methods and sent her the evidence I'd photographed. What you're describing matches intelligence we've been developing about organized insurance fraud operations, Agent Reeves said. We've had suspicious deaths in 6 states that showed similar patterns, but we've never had advance warning or inside access to their communications. Your mother's discovery may have given us the break we needed to stop them. The FBI had been tracking suspicious insurance claims involving construction workers whose families died in apparent accidents, but they'd always arrived after the fact when evidence had been carefully staged. Frank's network had been operating for at least 8 years, collecting millions in fraudulent payouts while making each murder look like tragedy. Your mother's warning probably saved your lives, Agent Reeves continued. If she discovered their plans and contacted you before they could execute the murders, you might be the first intended victims to escape alive. That makes you incredibly valuable witnesses, but also incredibly dangerous to their operation. Agent Reeves explained that the FBI could provide protection, but they needed us to stay exactly where we were until federal agents could reach us. The cabin's remote location made it difficult for Frank to find, but it also made it difficult for law enforcement to provide immediate assistance if he did locate us. I agreed to wait for FBI protection, but less than an hour after hanging up, I saw headlights moving slowly up the mountain road toward grandmother's cabin. 3 vehicles, driving without headlights, approaching with the kind of careful stealth that suggested hostile intent rather than law enforcement rescue. I woke Noah and moved him into grandmother's bedroom closet, the most protected spot in the cabin. I gave him my phone with Agent Reeves's number programmed in and told him to call for help if anything happened to me. He was crying silently, finally understanding that the danger was real and immediate. The vehicles stopped just beyond the cabin's driveway, and I watched through the front window as 6 men got out. Frank was leading them, but the others were strangers carrying equipment that looked like professional surveillance gear and weapons. They surrounded the cabin methodically, covering all exits before approaching the front door. Frank knocked and called out in his concerned stepfather voice, claiming that Mom was asking for us at the hospital and he'd brought help to take us home safely. But the presence of armed men and their obvious preparations for forced entry revealed the lie behind his performance. This wasn't rescue, it was execution. When I didn't respond, they began working on the door with tools designed to defeat simple locks within minutes. I used those precious seconds to call 911 and Agent Reeves simultaneously, reporting our location and the immediate threat. Both dispatchers promised help, but the nearest sheriff's deputy was 30 minutes away, and FBI agents were still 2 hours out. The door splintered and Frank entered first, still maintaining his facade of concerned parenthood, even as his associates spread through the cabin with obvious hostile intent. Sophia, honey, we know you're scared, but this has gone far enough. Your mother wants to see you. We just need to take you home where you belong. I stayed hidden behind the kitchen counter while Frank searched the main rooms, and his men checked the bedroom and bathroom areas. One of them found the closet where Noah was hiding and dragged him out despite his terrified screaming. Seeing my little brother in the hands of these killers broke something fundamental inside me. Let him go, I said, standing up from my hiding place with my hands raised. He's just a kid. He doesn't understand what's happening. Take me if you want, but let Noah go back to Mom. Frank's expression shifted when he saw me, the concerned stepfather mask slipping to reveal something cold and predatory underneath. Oh, sweetheart, your mother isn't going to be asking for anyone anymore, Frank said with casual cruelty. She had a terrible accident at the hospital. Something about a medication reaction that stopped her heart. These things happen when people are under psychiatric care, especially when they're already unstable from grief and paranoia. The casual announcement of Mom's murder hit me like a physical blow. She'd been killed in the hospital, probably by someone in Frank's network who had access to medical facilities. Her warning call that saved Noah and me had cost her life, but she'd known the risk and chosen to protect us anyway. But don't worry, Frank continued. We're going to make sure you kids don't suffer. It'll be quick and look completely natural. A gas leak at grandmother's old cabin, 2 children who didn't know how to properly maintain propane systems. Very sad. But these things happen when kids try to live on their own. One of Frank's men was already connecting equipment to the cabin's propane tank, preparing to stage the explosion that would eliminate the last witnesses to their insurance fraud network. They'd killed dozens of families using similar methods, always making murder look like tragic accidents to avoid suspicion and ensure insurance payouts. Vincent turned out to be a thin man with dead eyes, who moved with the efficiency of someone who'd done this many times before. Make it look right, he told Frank. Mother's suicide note is already planted at the hospital. Depressed widow couldn't handle raising kids alone, decided to take them with her. Classic murder-suicide, very believable. They'd thought of everything, created a complete narrative that would explain our deaths while generating sympathy for Frank as the grieving stepfather who'd lost his entire family to tragedy. The insurance companies would pay out millions, the police would close the case quickly, and Frank would disappear to start the process again with another vulnerable family. But their systematic approach had made them predictable. Agent Reeves had explained that the FBI was finally learning to recognize their patterns, connecting deaths across multiple states and building a case against the entire network. Frank's operation was about to face federal justice, but Noah and I needed to survive long enough for that justice to arrive. The sound of approaching engines broke the mountain silence, and Frank's expression shifted from predatory confidence to careful calculation. He'd expected more time to stage our deaths, but law enforcement was arriving faster than anticipated. His men began gathering their equipment, preparing to abandon the scene rather than risk capture in a shootout. Change of plans, Frank said, pulling out a pistol I'd never seen before. Make it look like a murder-suicide. Unstable teenager kills her little brother after their mother's breakdown, then shoots herself. Sometimes families just disintegrate under pressure. But the engine sounds were getting louder, and I could see flashlights moving through the trees around the cabin. Frank's associates were already running for their vehicles, abandoning him to handle the situation alone. Their carefully orchestrated operation was collapsing, leaving him desperate and dangerous. The sheriff's deputies burst through the front door just as Frank was positioning the gun to stage our deaths. The standoff lasted only seconds before Frank realized his situation was hopeless and surrendered rather than face additional murder charges for killing law enforcement officers. His network had trained him to be cautious, not suicidal. But Vincent hadn't run with the others. He was hiding behind the cabin with a rifle, waiting for an opportunity to eliminate the witnesses that could destroy their entire operation. As deputies handcuffed Frank, Vincent's first shot shattered the front window, sending everyone diving for cover. The firefight lasted 8 minutes, with Vincent holding off 4 sheriff's deputies while trying to position himself for clean shots at Noah and me. But FBI agents were arriving during the battle, surrounding the cabin with superior firepower and tactical equipment that Vincent couldn't match alone. Agent Reeves herself took the shot that ended Vincent's threat, a single bullet that dropped him as he tried to reload behind grandmother's woodpile. The sudden silence after the gunfire felt deafening, broken only by Noah's quiet sobbing and radio chatter from law enforcement coordinating the scene. The arrests that followed revealed the full scope of Frank's network. Michael Petrov had been the financial coordinator, managing insurance claims and payouts across multiple states. Dr. Sandra Kowalski had been providing medical cover, falsifying death certificates and psychiatric records to support their narratives. Frank's real name was Franklin Delacroix, and he'd been wanted in connection with suspicious deaths dating back to 2014. He'd married 9 different women during that period, systematically expanding their life insurance coverage before eliminating them and their children through carefully staged accidents. The FBI investigation uncovered 43 suspicious deaths across 8 states, all following the same pattern of targeting vulnerable families and staging elaborate accidents to collect insurance payouts. The network had generated over $60 million in fraudulent claims while destroying dozens of families. Mom's murder in the hospital had been orchestrated by Dr. Kowalski, who'd administered a fatal drug interaction disguised as routine psychiatric medication. But Mom's warning call had provided the FBI with evidence and advance notice that finally allowed them to catch the killers in action. The trial lasted 6 months and resulted in life sentences without parole for Frank, Michael, and Dr. Kowalski. The judge noted that their systematic targeting of grieving families represented some of the most callous murders in federal court history. Vincent had died during his arrest, but his death was ruled justified self-defense. Noah and I testified during the sentencing phase about the terror of being hunted by people who'd pretended to love us while planning our deaths. We described Mom's courage in warning us despite knowing it would cost her life, and the months of manipulation that had nearly succeeded in destroying our family. The insurance companies were forced to pay substantial settlements to families of previous victims, money that could never restore the lives that had been lost, but provided some measure of justice for the survivors. A victims' compensation fund was established to help other families affected by the network's crimes. Noah and I were placed in custody of Aunt Linda, who'd been horrified to learn how Frank had manipulated her perceptions of Mom's mental state. She moved us across the country to start fresh, away from the memories and media attention that followed the case. We both started therapy to process the trauma of nearly being murdered. The healing was slow and difficult, complicated by survivor's guilt and the knowledge that Mom had died to save us. But knowing that her sacrifice had brought down an entire criminal network and prevented them from killing other families helped us find meaning in our loss. 2 years later, Noah and I attended the dedication of a memorial garden for victims of insurance fraud, with Mom's name engraved alongside dozens of other families who'd been murdered by Frank's network. We planted white roses in her memory and promised to never forget that love and courage had triumphed over evil. The memorial included a plaque with Mom's final words to us, "Get your brother and hide. Don't trust your stepfather." Those words had saved our lives and brought justice to monsters who'd been killing families for years. Sometimes the people who claim to love you are the ones planning to destroy you, but real love always finds a way to protect what matters most, even when it costs everything to do so.